So I've been involved in a number of projects internationally, and one of the things that my friends and I realized is that that we need to, in some ways, be imperialistic with our culture. And in our case, we're a bunch of geeks, and so we very intentionally have tried to spread geek culture wherever we go. We've operated in a number of places, a lot in Afghanistan recently, North Korea. We're in Liberia right now, Central African Republic, like various parts of our little geek tribe. And I put this talk together to sort of show what I mean by geek imperialism, and also to highlight why I think it's important. Because I think that being a geek is, I think it's good for the world. And so for a little bit of context, these stories I'm going to share with you are set in Afghanistan, in Jalalabad, which is right on the border with Pakistan. And Jalalabad is actually the just a few kilometers from our place in Afghanistan. Was Osama bin Laden's, when he was in Afghanistan, his compound. And we were over there. So we were over in Afghanistan doing infrastructure work, setting up telecommunications, putting satellite dishes on top of hospitals. And so these are some of our tools. We have this really cool thing. It's an inflatable satellite dish. So you can, like, the whole thing literally fits in like a suitcase and then blows up to a 9-foot diameter satellite dish.
Is it circular or parabolic?
What's that?
Circular or parabolic, or does it
It's parabolic, and inside, so there's actually a parabolic dish inside of there, and so you can see down here there are two tubes running in. So there's a blower, and we tune the parabola of the dish by blowing more air into the front, and then it stretches it back, and then the transmitter bolts onto the front and gets pulled taut, and then we pull it down. So when we need to, because satellite dishes, in order to get a good connection, they need to be quite large, like 9 feet in diameter, which is very inconvenient to transport. And so this is my desk and our networking gear, and this is Ken. We also ran a bar in eastern Afghanistan, which is a whole other set of stories by itself. But we were over there, like, doing our jobs. But we realized that that there actually aren't geeks in Afghanistan, or certainly not very many. And geeks as a character type require a certain environment and a certain nurturing. You need access to education. You need access to tools, and in some ways. Because Afghanistan has been at war for 30 consecutive years, there's almost no education. There's very, very little access to tools. And one of the things that's also very frustrating about trying to build things in war is they're always being torn down. And if you build something and it gets immediately torn down, there's not a lot of incentive to build it, to build anything else. And so we realized that because of these conditions, that there just wasn't, like, the right environment to foster geeks. Now there are some, and so these are some pictures of some geeky things that I enjoyed about Afghanistan. So this is actually a satellite dish that was built out of found materials. So these are all USAID oil, cooking oil tins, and so the cooking oil comes in these big tins, and they snip around them, flatten them out, and then rivet them together, and you can actually just make a satellite dish instead of having a $5,000 one that blows up. that you airdrop in. Something that I really like is how the irrigation works. So most of the farming in Afghanistan is done by hand. And so they don't have like big machines that are moving earth around. And all the irrigation has a fractal dimension. And when you fly over it, you can see these, like, in America, like where you have big machinery, all the water troughs are just these long lines, because that's how you plow them up and down. In Afghanistan, they follow this fractal pattern where you can see this self-similar pattern, and it keeps going out and out. And when you fly over a valley, you see these beautiful fractal patterns across the valley. And Afghans do amazing things with mud, because they don't have a whole lot else. And so one day we decided that we wanted to have a really nice fireplace in our bar. And so we hired someone to build a fireplace. And they showed up in a taxi with plastic sheets in the backseat of the taxi, and the backseat of the taxi was full of mud. Like literally shoveled full of mud. And these two guys who were sitting in the front seat in each other's laps jump out, unload the mud, and they turned the mud into this fireplace using very few tools, and by like working hay into it and working it into layers, and working those layers into a dome, and then letting it mostly dry, and then cutting holes in it and putting pieces of wood through, and then flipping it to form the bottom, because you can't see it here, but this is a mud sphere. And then they cook bread in these. And how you cook bread in one of these mud sphere ovens is you take a board, you put some fabric over it with some padding, and you lay your dough on it, and then you slap it up underneath. You have mud bricks, and this is a fusion of this is mud brick on this side, and this was a shipping container, and they do alternating layers of plastic sheeting in mud for temperature insulation. Kids selling pirated software, and there's actually cell phones have totally changed the face of Afghan society. 10 years ago, there were 100,000 phone lines in Afghanistan, all of them copper. Now there's, I think, 10 million cell phones in the span of like 10 years. And this is an improvised explosive device that we had in our bar. It was diffused. But these are made of leftover Soviet rounds. Like the Soviets, when they left behind munitions, and they don't have the guns to shoot them, and so they have adapted the munitions for improvised explosive devices. And so why do we want to create Geeks? Mostly just because they're useful. And in my own selfish reasons for wanting Geeks is I needed people to help me. And so when I'm in Afghanistan, I'm very clearly not an Afghan, and it's somewhat hard for me to get around the country safely because of threat, like you can get killed, you're more likely to get kidnapped because you're worth money, and so you have to be very careful about your movements. And if you need to go across town to hit reset on a router, that can take a lot of coordination. But if you have like an Afghan geek, they can just zip right across town, push a button, reset the router, and you're back in business. And then also, we wanted to have a lasting legacy. We didn't want to build something that fell apart when we left, and we also didn't want to keep going back. And so I actually haven't been back to Afghanistan in about 2 years. And the projects that we're running are still going. Like we just wired a pile of money into Afghanistan, and the Afghans who we trained are now running around continuing to build projects and maintain things. And so we can actually keep these projects going without physically going over there ourselves. And then that's really important because fixing Afghanistan is going to take decades, far longer than the United States or Europe or anyone else is going to care about the problem. And so any solution that we put in there have to be people who understand it, who know how to maintain it, and know how to grow it and make it something that fixes a long-term problem. And then also, I do sort of believe in geek manifest destiny of us taking over the whole universe. So here are some examples of some geeky things that our team did. We built the first municipal Wi-Fi in Afghanistan, and we did so using only locally sourced materials. So you can get Linksys WRT routers brought in from Pakistan. You can buy them down to the local market. And we taught them how to make parabolic dishes. Initially, we taught them on a laser cutter because we had one. But then after a while, then someone caught it on fire and stuff like that. And they actually just realized that they could take the tin from the cooking oil cans and turn them into parabolic dishes. And so we set up these point-to-point dishes all around the city, and we're distributing internet through this. And one of the highlights of my experience was one of the kids who's working for us. We made a rule: if you made your own antenna and set up your own, router, then you could have internet. And of course, everyone once they taste the internet, they want more of it. And that is a universal across all of human society. Yeah, and one of the kids who was working for us, he was a teenager. Oh, okay. He and I were Skyping across a dish that he built and he was in a mud hut using a battery and a solar panel that he had rigged up. So he's actually in a mud hut Skyping with me in America. Oh, and one time our satellite dish blew over in a windstorm. While none of us were there, they managed to put the thing back together well enough to email us pictures and say, "Your internet is broken. Please send replacement parts." And so that's what that is. The satellite dish brings back together, asking for parts to fix the internet. So I'm running short on time, so I'm going to go quickly.
You have 5 minutes.
Oh, 5 minutes? Okay, cool. And so instead of just airdropping technology in, we would try and attract people who had sort of nascent geek talent. We ran an after-school program. One of the things in Afghanistan, a lot of the students are paid to be in school because a lot of the organizations that run schools are paid based on how many people are there. So we were one of the only schools where the students weren't paid, and we also didn't have any teachers. And so it was entirely based on a mentor relationship where we would mentor people, and then they would mentor other people, and we would have 100 kids a day in there, and the ones some kids saw the laser cutter and they were like, I want to know how to operate this thing. And so we had them using Ubuntu and using almost entirely open source software. So it certainly isn't easy to use, and they would actually work through and learn all the things so that they could make their own router, and that they could have internet at their house. And the students who went through that process ended up working for us on more complex projects because they had self-selected and educated themselves in order to get a copy of the internet. Now they're suitable for basically being local sysadmins for us. And so I love this picture. So we did one of the first OLPC deployments, and I was I took a picture of him because here's a kid using OLPC. And then after when I took a picture, he immediately covered up what he was doing. What he's doing is he's running because he thought he was in trouble. He wasn't in trouble. He's downloading satellite TV crack codes because they had these receiver crackers, but you needed to keep their codes refreshed. So he ran a little business, and he would come use our internet, look up satellite crack codes, and go around and update people's things. And so that's exactly the kinds of people that we want. Skill sets, problem solving, communication, mentor relationships are really important. and like, you know, teaching people like, you know, how to use, like we mostly use open source software, partly ideological, but then also they don't have money to pay for licenses, and so or don't have very much money. Certainly can't afford a lot of licenses. So so there's, you know, a whole generation of students who are familiar with open source and whatnot. And I think I think that our projects, like, you know, have been successful. Like, there are still Afghans, you know, running around building stuff in Afghanistan today, even though I don't go back over there anymore. And some of them have like the student who lived in the mud hut who built his little rig. He's currently finishing his master's degree at Georgetown on a Fulbright scholarship. And so, like, now on international development with focus on technology. And so my like when he got his Fulbright, I was like, sweet, Hamid can go back and fix Afghanistan because I'm fucking tired of it. And so just like, so I'll just flip through a couple like interesting pictures. Like one the first when we set up the laser cutter, it's like, well, what do we want to make? And one of the students was interested in chess, and so we, like, you know, went to Wikipedia, got all the stuff, and laser cut chess sets. One of our friends who sets up fabrication labs around the world noted that chess sets are almost universally one of the first things that are fabricated. And so these are 3 different labs that she's been associated with, and chess sets that they made. And so I thought that was a really interesting sort of geeky thing. It's sort of part of another talk, but one of the things that we did a lot was mapping. And so there's an open source map called Openstreetmap that we would teach the kids how to edit. And one of so we use it sort of as a teaching tool, but then also there weren't good maps. One of the things that was neat about having locals do all the mapping is everything has local names and has features that the locals care about. And so, like, in Jalalabad, this is the map of the park with like the name of the swimming pool, and these are paths through the rose garden. And so if you've never been to Afghanistan, and even, you know, the tens of thousands of Americans who've been to Afghanistan, almost none of them have ever walked through the rose garden. They're not aware that the Afghans actually love rose gardens, and so and that's the kind of thing that they care about. And so I think that them being able to, you know, express in a language of technology that the rest of the world can understand, that a portion of their world can be seen that you don't see as a soldier or a professional geospatial analyst. You don't do those kinds of details, and I think it's important that people be able to express themselves that way.
Awesome Todd Road?
Yeah, that's my road. So funny thing about this, that's my bar. So funny thing about this is Apple has fixed this, but Apple scraped OpenStreetMap when they did their map of the world, and Awesome Todd roads. So we had an edit battle going of Awesome Todd and Stinky Todd, and so fortunately Apple scraped it. But for a while, if you pulled up your iPhone and zoomed into Afghanistan, it was like Awesome Todd's road and Hamid's road. He and I are the ones who do the edit battles, and like actually on your iPhone, which is really cool. Do I have 2 minutes, Tim?
You're now into your question time.
Okay. This I think is a really good example of why like how technology as a language is very useful. So in Afghanistan, Afghans actually have a very deep culture of poetry and writing, and this was a letter. So this is from a district on the border of Pakistan in an area that was that was currently allied with the Afghan government, but was in deep danger of flipping over to a Taliban-controlled area. And the tribal elders for this area delivered this letter to the commander of the local military base, saying, we're going to become violent if this issue isn't addressed. And like the letter is full of proverbs. Like, we have a proverb: there is darkness under the flame of the candle. It's actually quite hard to understand what the problem is. And so the military commander turned to our team, because we have a closer relationship with the locals than they do, and asked us to help figure out what the problem was, because they certainly don't want this area to turn over to the Taliban. And so what they were describing in the letter is that their village was being flooded because of construction that was happening upstream by an agriculture project. And so what we did is we walked along, and with the Afghans, we had them take pictures and describe the problem. And so this is old imagery, and we took pictures, and their village is along this bank. This is current imagery, and so you can see the river has entirely shifted course. And so then, what's the problem? Well, there's this old irrigation. This is old imagery. In order to get water to go down this irrigation, they raised a berm. And so you can actually see the little rapids there. They raised the berm, and that also changed the flow of this side of the river and was driving that river right into their village. And what they wanted was the group that was doing this construction. And the group that was doing this was a Japanese organization. And they were actually making rice, teaching another village over here how to grow rice. And so they were unable to convey to the Japanese organization this problem. And what they wanted was a berm to be put on their village so that it didn't get washed away. And so now this was, in sort of classic Afghan, as things are in war. There was then this whole area flooded. If you remember, like when Pakistan flooded and hundreds of thousands of people were displaced, this whole place flooded and both villages washed away, and they had to rebuild anyway. So it became a moot point. But for a while, we were feeling really good about this because using a cell phone, our Afghan friends were able to go and technologically describe a problem using geotagged photos, aerial imagery, and maps in a way that you could take to the local military, the U.S. military commander, and say, this is the problem we have. And so a lot of what our team still does in Afghanistan is they're running around with little smartphones, mapping things out, and describing problems in a way that is easier to translate across different cultures. Or at least, since we are a technologically driven society, if you want to communicate something to Americans, you really have to use technology. And since Americans are, for better or for worse, part of the landscape now in Afghanistan, they need to, their lives will be better if they learn our language. And so I don't think that everyone should be a geek, but I do think that there's some small portion of society that has to be filled with geeks in order for the world to be a better place. And that's basically the end of my talk.
So we have 2 minutes for questions. At 2:50, we have another speaker.
Cool. Any questions?
Are you doing a talk on 3D scan also?
I might.
I would like to make a request that you do.
Okay, cool. I'll probably do it in a different room because this is like the social justice one. But yeah, I will do one on 3 scan.
Other questions about this project?
Did you find that the kids were like a little bit more kind of open-minded to different ways?
Oh yeah, you have to start with kids. We tried actually starting with college students, and by the time someone's in college, they're culturally and cognitively too far gone. You have to start the indoctrination at about 15 years old.
But it was all men or boys, right?
No, there were. These are girls using computers, and actually, this is Kate, who is somewhere around here at BIL, she was teaching calculus and computers to girls, and actually, so on Monday, so one of the projects that we started there was a sort of conference on International Women's Day about women's issues, and on Monday, for the first time that we are aware of, there are going to be women performing music on stage unmasked in front of men. and with the permission of the local politicians. This will be the 5th Women's Day conference that we have helped coordinate. And like even in that 5-year span, there's actually been a lot of relatively a fair amount of progress, because the to even have a woman get on stage and give a talk in front of men was the first year there were hardly any women who were allowed on stage. Most of the talks were given by men. Now there are plenty of women giving talks, and they're even allowed to do music. Music is something that was previously outlawed in Afghanistan. So.
It's still deadly sometimes, right?
Yep, so there's no story in Afghanistan has a completely happy story. One of the speakers from our Women's Day event was assassinated a few weeks ago, and she ended up going into politics and was assassinated at a girls' school, and her and several of the female students were killed for reasons that are stupid.
Did that girl who won the Nobel Prize work with you at all?
No, she was in Pakistan.
Sorry.
Yep. No worries. They're very close, and she is from the same tribal region, but all of her work was on the other side of the border. Yeah.
All right. Thank
Cool.
you very much.
Thanks.